A recent video claims that the argument of the fine-tuning of the universe is not a good argument for God's existence. This video will address just a few points made in the beginning of that video. I do not pretend that this video is comprehensive or exhaustive in its scope. Up front, I am not a physicist or a cosmologist, but many of the individuals in this video have written and spoken and produced videos for a wider lay audience about their field. I think more laypersons should have a voice in this conversation. This video is but one attempt to do just that. Any errors about the science are my own. In 2019, I co-authored a book on the cosmos with theologians, historians, philosophers, and scientists, all from a Christian perspective. We wrote it in hopes of encouraging more people to get involved in this important dialogue about our place in the universe. I noticed in the beginning of the video there was no singular definition of God given by the producers or those being interviewed. God is mentioned in the beginning, but not defined. That's a key. What do these people mean by God?
Our universe is filled with galaxies, nebula, stars, and planets, and perhaps most importantly, living things. But it's been argued that if the constants of nature were even slightly different, then none of this would be possible. And that this fine-tuning is evidence of a God that had to select the constants to be just right. The argument is often expressed like this: the fine-tuning is vastly improbable under naturalism, but not theism, and thus supports the existence of God. In this film, we'll hear from some of the world's leading physicists and philosophers of physics who'll explain why they disagree. We've had the good fortune to interview many of the world's leading cosmologists, and what's clear is there is far less consensus that fine-tuning is real than advocates of the argument let on.
I think it's a bit of a dangerous argument because we have no idea what life would be like, even with these numbers. We don't know enough about life to know that it would never necessarily come about with the numbers that we see. We don't know enough about it to say it wouldn't come about with other numbers. So I think it's a dangerous argument to use. There may be another reason why they have these values, which is purely mathematical. We just don't know. So there are big questions here, which are interesting to talk about, but I don't think you can make any big conclusion from them.
Penrose's belief that fine-tuning is a dangerous argument is a subjectively aesthetic judgment, not one that comes from the universe itself or the mathematics. Consider what he suggests in his book, Fashion, Faith, and Fantasy in the New Physics of the Universe. Quote, "Of course, it might be the case that we are entering a new phase of basic research into fundamental physics, where requirements of mathematical consistency become paramount, and in those situations where such requirements, together with a coherence with previously established principles, prove insufficient, additional criteria of mathematical elegance and simplicity must be invoked. While it may seem unscientific to appeal to such aesthetic desiderata in a fully objective search for the physical principles underlying the workings of the universe, it is remarkable how fruitful, indeed essential, such aesthetic judgments seem to have frequently proved to be. We have come across many examples in physics where beautiful mathematical ideas have turned out to underlie fundamental advances in understanding." End quote. An interesting appeal to beauty and aesthetics. How does a physicist like Dr. Penrose identify, let alone quantify or calculate, beauty? Penrose notes, quote, "However, this role of aesthetic judgment is a very difficult issue to be objective about. It is often the case that some physicist might think that a particular scheme is very beautiful, whereas another might emphatically not share that view. Elements of fashion can often assume unreasonable proportions when it comes to aesthetic judgments in the world of theoretical physics, just as in the case of art or the design of clothing." So in the end, what might appear dangerous to Penrose may seem adventurous to others, or maybe bold, silly, courageous, or even beautiful. He cannot finally use physics to demonstrate his conclusions. How does one represent danger in an equation? If Penrose can invoke beauty, then there is nothing which prevents a believer from invoking God when it comes to an ultimate explanation for the existence of the laws of physics of the universe. But so what if the fine-tuning argument is dangerous? In his book, Penrose seems to suggest we ought to embrace the danger. Welcome to the cosmic rodeo, where beauty and danger come together in a remarkable variety of ways. Penrose notes, quote, "There are some key aspects to the nature of our actual universe that are so exceptionally odd, though not always fully recognized as such, that if we do not indulge in what may appear to be outrageous flights of fantasy, we shall have no chance at all of coming to terms with what may well be an extraordinary, fantastical seeming underlying truth." End quote. Maybe even dangerous flights of fantasy. If we're using aesthetics as a guide to the physics of the universe, then one person's danger can easily be another person's adventure. Some people think skydiving is dangerous. Some people think skydiving is exhilarating. But a physics equation isn't going to solve the difference between these two views of skydiving. But if one saw the mathematics of a skydive freefall, let's say, it would be reasonable to conclude there was intelligence behind the math and intelligence involved in safely executing a jump. But why can math describe what happens when you jump out of an airplane in the first place? So what about the math? The late Nobel laureate Steven Weinberg once quipped that the more he studied the universe, the more to him it seemed pointless. Yet Weinberg shared the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1979 with two others for, quote, "their contributions to the theory of the unified weak and electromagnetic interaction between elementary particles, including their inter alia, the prediction of the weak neutral current," end quote. So is that a pointless accomplishment? If the universe is indeed pointless, so are the physics, and so are Nobel Prizes. Who cares? Why bother? Cosmologist Alexander Vilenkin reasons that the laws of the universe should be there even prior to the universe itself. Does this mean that the laws are not mere descriptions of reality and can have an independent existence of their own? In the absence of space, time, and matter, what tablets could they be written upon? The laws are expressed in the form of mathematical equations. If the medium of mathematics is the mind, does this mean that mind should predate the universe? End quote. Penrose's basic objection is this. He claims we don't know enough about life in general to conclude it could not have arisen in another universe with different properties. Therefore, we should not conclude that it was an astronomically unlikely chance that terrestrial carbon-based life forms arose in this universe. But note that it's not the universe or the equations or the laws of physics which tell Penrose that such speculation is unwarranted or even dangerous. No speculation or theoretical hypotheses about what other forms life or other universes could take is evidence against the conclusion that our universe and the apparent fine-tuning emanate from God. If the physical sciences tell us anything, it is that the only way by which living things come into being is through other living things. Physical empirical science also tells us that living things do not arise or come into being from non-living inorganic material. Therefore, it logically follows that the first life came into being from a living being and not non-living inorganic matter. It also follows that this being not only created life, but created and arranged the heavens and the earth as a place where life could exist. Now, recall what is mentioned by the narrator at the beginning of this video.
We've had the good fortune to interview many of the world's leading cosmologists, and what's clear is there is far less consensus that fine-tuning is real than advocates of the argument let on.
They didn't say that they interviewed many of the world's leading theologians, however. God appears to have been marginalized. But most of us are going to be reluctant to challenge the conclusions of the world's leading cosmologists. Consider, though, Penrose's thoughts on how such authorities can and do influence our thinking. Penrose notes, quote, "We are used to authority having a strong influence on our thinking, whether it be the authority of our parents when we were young, or of our teachers during our schooling, or of people in respectable professions like doctors, lawyers, scientists, television presenters, or representatives of governments or international organizations, or indeed senior figures of religious institutions. In one way or another, authorities influence our opinions, and the information we receive in this way frequently leads us to having beliefs that we do not seriously question. Indeed, it is often the case that doubt never enters our minds about the validity of much of the information acquired this way. Moreover, such influences of authority will frequently affect our own behavior and positions in society, and any authority that we ourselves might come to possess can, in turn, enhance the status of our own opinions as they then affect the beliefs of others." End quote. There is finally nothing wrong with authority per se, but it can be employed as a means of intimidation. Sometimes appeals are made to the expertise of authorities in a particular field, not to encourage discussion or thought, but as an attempt to silence any objections. When authority is appealed to in this sense, it is the fallacy known simply as the appeal to authority. It is the tacit idea in an argument that because an expert authority said it, it must likely be true. This can be a problem for both atheists and Christians, of course, and I am not saying that this is the intention of this video, to intimidate, but it is crucial to be cognizant of the potential fallacy of appealing to authority. From John D. Barrow and Frank Tipler's book, The Anthropic Cosmological Principle. This book is a detailed examination into the concept that if the constants, laws, and quantities of the universe were not arranged as they are, human beings, anthropos, man, would not exist. In short, Tipler and Barrow ask the startling question: how could the enormous cosmos seem to be condescendingly accommodating to tiny anthropos? This is not, by the way, a religious tome. Quote, "The idea of a partially anthropocentric universe with teleological, that is, purposeful, aspects is the warp and woof of the Judeo-Christian worldview that underlies the growth of Western civilization." End quote. In short, the scientific endeavor in our culture exists primarily because it was assumed the universe was created by God and thus would be able to be explored and intelligibly understood. Note that James Clerk Maxwell, who discovered the forces of electricity and magnetism are two different forms of light, had Psalm 111:2 inscribed over the door of the Cavendish Laboratory in Cambridge. Quote, "Great are the works of the Lord. They are studied by all who delight in them." End quote. Barrow and Tipler go on to note, quote, "Current physical theories of the universe are extremely successful. This success is itself still a mystery. After all, there is no obvious reason why we should find ourselves able to understand the fundamental structure of nature. It is also in part a consequence of the fact that we have found nature to be constructed upon certain immutable foundation stones, which we call fundamental constants of nature. The fortuitous nature of many of their numerical values is a mystery that cries out for a solution." End quote. John D. Barrow went on to write another book called The Constants of Nature, and in this book, Barrow notes, quote, "The universal constants were not invented for reasons of practical convenience, but have forced themselves upon us irresistibly because of the agreement between the results of all relevant measurements, and, this is the essential thing, we know quite well in advance that all future measurements will yield to these selfsame constants." End quote. Here are some of the basic known constants of the universe. From where do these numbers come? We have the speed of light in a vacuum, the Planck constant, the Newtonian gravitational constant, and many others. And it is still a mystery to this day for naturalists and materialists and secularists to come up with an explanation as to the origin and reason for these numbers. Here is John D. Barrow once again, and Barrow's observations here point to the fact that more observations don't seem to be the panacea for helping us understand more about the nature of these numbers. Barrow notes, quote, "More observations and greater accuracy are not panaceas. In observational science, one must be aware of the different types of uncertainty and error. First, there is uncertainty introduced by the limiting accuracy of the measurement process. If your height is being measured to the nearest centimeter and is quoted as being 1.85 meters, it could actually lie anywhere between 1.845 and 1.855 meters. This type of uncertainty is usually well understood and can gradually be reduced by improving technology. Use a more finely graduated ruler, for example. Second, there is a subtler form of uncertainty, usually called systematic error or bias, which skews the data gathering process so that you unwittingly gather some sorts of evidence more easily than others. More seriously still, it may ensure that you are not observing what you thought you were observing." End quote. Basically, what John is saying is that we have to be aware of our operational and statistical biases in doing science. So for physicists and cosmologists who are not theists, how does their skeptical biases impact the interpretation and understanding of the fine-tuning argument? How would they presuppose to know if they are looking at evidence for God's workmanship or not? Why don't mathematics themselves count in favor of fine-tuning? Attempting to disparage fine-tuning by appealing to agnosticism or ignorance, we don't know, or other unseen, untestable entities like multiverses or many worlds, does not finally explain the origin, existence, and enigmatic efficacy of mathematics in relation to the universe and its constants, quantities, and laws. Mind is the medium of mathematics. It is therefore logically valid to conclude that there is a mind behind the mathematics of the cosmos. Sir Martin Rees, in his book, Just Six Numbers, The Deep Forces That Shape the Universe, notes that, quote, "Astronomy is the oldest numerical science, crucial in ancient times for calendars and navigation. It is now experiencing a surge of discovery. The enhanced focus on time as we enter the new millennium is boosting an interest in our cosmic environment. Astronomy is still the science of numbers. The picture that emerges, a map in time as well as in space, is not what most of us expected. It offers a new perspective on how a single Genesis event created billions of galaxies, black holes, stars, and planets, and how atoms have been assembled here on Earth, and perhaps on other worlds, into living beings intricate enough to ponder their origins. Our emergence and survival depend on very special tuning of the cosmos, a cosmos that may be even vaster than the universe we can actually see." End quote. Physicists call the force that holds our feet to the planet gravity. There is another force called the residual strong force, which binds quarks into protons and neutrons in the nucleus of an atom. Now, it's interesting, gravity is some 10 to the 38th to 10 to the 36 times weaker than the strong force. That's 10 followed by about 36 or 37 zeros. No one really knows why this is the case. Rees notes, quote, "We have no theory that tells us the value of n, the large number. However, Rees also notes that, quote, nothing as complex as humankind could have emerged if n were much less than 1 followed by 36 zeros." That's amazing. Why is it that way? What could this possibly mean? Quote, "Meaning is important, is even central. It is not only that man is adapted to the universe adapted to man. Imagine a universe in which one or another of the fundamental dimensionless constants of physics is altered by a few percent one way or the other. Man could never come into being in such a universe. That is the central point of the anthropic principle. According to this principle, a life-giving factor lies at the center of the whole machinery and design of the world." End quote. Stephen C. Meyer, in his recent book, The Return of the God Hypothesis, notes, quote, "Simply defining constants as part of the laws of physics still does not explain why the physical constants themselves have the exact values they do. And since nothing in fundamental physical theory explains why the constants have these precise values, the values still require explanation. An explanation the laws of physics can't provide, since these laws can't explain themselves or their own contingent features." End quote. That comes from Meyer's The Return of the God Hypothesis, compelling scientific evidence for the existence of God. Meyer goes on to note, quote, "Since in our experience fine-tuning results from intelligent agency, and since naturalism denies the existence of any intelligent agent pre-existing the universe, philosophical naturalists should not expect to observe a universe in which life depends upon exquisite fine-tuning." End quote. Geraint F. Lewis and Luke A. Barnes, in their book A Fortunate Universe, Life in a Finely Tuned Cosmos, talk about entropy. Think of low entropy as a teacup sitting on a table. Someone gives it a shove and it crashes to the floor. The shattered teacup is now in a state of high entropy. That is, it's not likely going to jump up off the floor and reassemble itself. Entropy seems to be a one-way street. Barnes points out that it is highly unlikely that the low entropy state of the beginning of our universe came about through any prior high entropy state, as much as it would be unlikely that we would expect to see the shattered teacup to suddenly reassemble itself and end up back on the table. Under philosophical naturalism, there is no reason or explanation for why our universe began in such a low entropic state. It all seems to point to intention and design. At least that's Luke Barnes's conclusion. His co-author, Geraint F. Lewis, is an agnostic atheist. Here is Dr. Sean Carroll inventing universes. Now, I want you to pay attention to what Carroll attempts to do in the following clip. He constructs a few simple theoretical universes and declares that there is no God outside of them who created them. No God to superintend or govern these hypothetical states of matter, energy, time, and space.
So if you did believe that God was a necessary being, that you literally could not imagine a universe in which God did not play an important role, in order logically for me to refute that belief, all I need to do is to invent a universe in which God does not exist. You know, if you say that all swans are white, as a logical fact, all I need to do is show you one black swan to show that your logical argument can't be right. So all we need to do is invent a universe that God does not play a role in, and that would improve your imagination enough so that you could imagine universes where God was not important. I claim that it is not hard to invent universes, possible universes, hypothetical universes, not necessarily our own, but universes that are self-contained, consistent, coherent, and in which God plays no special role, no role at all. So here's a universe. Apologies for the math. This universe is three-dimensional space, evolving in time, and in that space there is one particle. That is the whole universe. This particle moves according to Newton's laws of motion under the influence of some potential energy. So here's space, there's time, there's our particle moving, it has an equation of motion. And this goes on forever into the infinite far past or the infinite far future. I claim this is a logically conceivable universe. that you can't stop me from imagining that this is the universe. It's clearly not our universe. I'm not trying to claim that there's some complicated transformation that makes our real world look like this. But this could be a universe, and there's no God in this universe. There's just a particle moving. If you want a slightly more realistic example, here is a universe that I think might actually be right. I replace, instead of three-dimensional space, I have a space of states, which is some Hilbert space. That is to say, some quantum mechanical space of possible states, a space of wave functions, if you like. There's also time evolution, so the state is an element of that Hilbert space, and it evolves with time. If you want to know how it evolves, well, it solves this equation, Schrödinger's equation, where this capital H is an operator called the Hamiltonian, which basically tells you how the state evolves with time. So this universe is one that is mathematically isomorphic to a trajectory in a Hilbert space according to this Schrödinger's equation. It goes forever, from the infinite far past to the infinite far future. It is self-contained. There's no something outside this universe that is holding it up, sustaining it, keeping it going, causing it to exist, or allowing it to persist. It is simply that mathematical structure, full stop.
But then the question remains, who then is ultimately responsible for the arrangement of these theoretical universes? Well, Dr. Carroll, of course. It takes the input of an intelligent agent to arrange even the simplest theoretical states of matter, energy, space, and time. Dr. Carroll just takes these for granted and rearranges them. He also assumes, but does not explain, where the mathematics come from. Also, how does Dr. Carroll know what God's role would be in creating and governing a universe? If Carroll has demonstrated anything in these clips, it is simply that a universe of any kind requires the input of an intelligent agent. One of the most significant things about Jesus of Nazareth is that we have heard of him. So to what does this all point? A better question would be, to whom does this all point? I would say Jesus of Nazareth. Fine-tuning is precisely what we would expect based on what the Bible says of God's creation of the universe. But why the Bible? Jesus' resurrection. There are presently no evidentially backed naturalistic hypotheses that best explain why we have the New Testament and the origin of the Christian faith. Jesus rising from the dead remains the best explanation for both. 1 Corinthians 15. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit created the heavens and the earth. Genesis 1, Proverbs 8, John 1, Colossians 1. God created the earth to be inhabited. Isaiah 45:18. The heavens and the earth are filled with God's glory. Psalm 19, 1-6 and Isaiah 6:3. The created order displays God's workmanship. Psalm 111:2. We can see God's invisible attributes through what he has created. Romans 1:18 and forward. Fine-tuning is thus exactly what we would expect, given what God has revealed to us in the pages of Scripture. Here is more on Jesus' resurrection. Last year, I had the privilege of talking briefly with Dr. Bart Ehrman on our Atheist and Christian Book Club. I asked Dr. Ehrman what actual evidence he had, historical evidence, for his belief that the disciples were mistaken about Jesus' resurrection. He claimed his explanation was history, but never gave me any actual evidence from texts or other sources which made the specific claim that the disciples and many others who saw Jesus alive after his crucifixion were mistaken. Instead, he tried turning the attention back to me, claiming I was only making a religious argument and that I didn't apply the same criteria to my faith as I do to other faiths. But actually I do. Bart had no idea how thoroughly I have investigated Mormonism, which he mentions, and how much I do apply critical thought to other religions and belief systems. That's my job at watchmen.org, including atheism. If I did not do that, I would not be talking to Bart Ehrman on our Atheist and Christian Book Club. So here's the clip.
Okay, Bart, just to wrap up where we kind of left off, so for everybody else to finish up everything. So we're on, and I'm understanding you. So let's talk about what's going on in 1 Corinthians 15 with the resurrection text there, where Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15:17, if Christ is not raised, your faith is worthless. You are dead in your sins. And so where we left off at the beginning, you'd said that something happened in terms of it not being the resurrection, not being the best explanation for why we have the New Testament. And I argued that I think the resurrection is the central message of the New Testament text. If it's not true, then we don't have forgiveness of sins, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15:17. And you said, I think I heard you say that the disciples saw something, but they were mistaken. And that's, for you, that's the best explanation. They were mistaken about what they saw. But your best explanation has actually zero textual support when we have this corpus of textual support for an actual resurrection. So I'm wondering, with all your criticism of the text, how can you explain a best explanation without any text whatsoever?
I'm having trouble understanding you, Daniel, because you would agree that Mormons have sacred texts,
Yes.
that talk about things that they believed happened.
Right.
You do not believe those things happened.
Not in terms of the historical.
Right.
We could talk about Joseph Smith. I've got
And how
all
do you
that
explain
history.
their texts?
Well, I've got plenty of.
You don't have alternative Mormon texts that say other things.
Well, I interviewed Robert Bauman. I have written about this and studied about it myself. I don't want to extrapolate on why Joseph Smith's history is
No,
questionable.
Daniel, you're not hearing my question. I'm applying the same logic that you just asked me about to what you believe. You don't understand how You don't understand how Paul could believe in the resurrection unless the resurrection really happened.
Right.
But you do think that Mormons can believe that Joseph Smith saw something even though it didn't happen.
Well, I'm saying that as a textual scholar, your support, you don't have, for the best explanation of why we have the New Testament text, you don't have text for that, and you're calling it the best explanation.
We do have text for that.
No, the mistake, your idea that there was a mistake, that the disciples were mistaken, Paul was mistaken.
All the non-Christians write about Christianity said it was a mistake.
Yeah, what would be that mistake? What was it, a vision? Was it a hallucination? What do you think?
What do I personally think?
Right, yeah.
Okay, I mean, I think what happened is after Jesus died, his disciples were completely discombobulated and upset because they thought that he was going to be the Messiah.
Right.
The Messiah,
Luke 24, the Emmaus Road. Yeah.
Well, I don't think
I'm sorry.
the Emmaus Road thing happened. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about history.
Okay.
The disciples of Jesus expected him to be the Messiah. They were upset because instead of doing what the Messiah is supposed to do, which is to drive out the enemy and set up a new kingdom, he was tortured to death by the enemy. They didn't understand that, but they did understand that their lives were in danger, and they probably got out of town as quickly as they could. Probably that night, I would guess. In Matthew, they go back to Galilee, and I think that's probably right. I think what happened is that one or more of them, sometime later, thought that they had a vision of Jesus of some kind. They had a vision. The word vision does not necessarily mean hallucination. The word vision comes from the Latin word video, which just means to see. You can, if you see a tree outside your window, that's a vision. You're seeing it, but it's a true vision. It's something that's actually there. Lots of people see things that aren't there. 1 out of 8 of us, so 3 of us here on this call, will see a dead relative in our lives, and we'll be convinced that this person really appeared to us. 1 out of 8 people have this experience. Your aunt dies, and 2 weeks later you see her in your bed. It happens all the time. There's a large psychological scholarship on non-veridical visions, which means visions that people are just seeing things. It happens with groups. Large groups of people see things all the time. There are lots of Roman Catholic groups, up to 500 people, who see the Blessed Virgin Mary, and they'll all swear they saw her. So my view is that the disciples of Jesus believed, some of them believed they saw visions they believed they saw Jesus after his death. And they convinced the others. If you're a Christian, as you are, then the simple solution is that Jesus appeared to them. Jesus appeared to them. If you're non-Christian, you'd say they thought they saw Jesus. Both things happen all the time. My view is that Jesus did not appear to them, because I do not believe Jesus was raised from the dead. I don't even think that Jesus was put into a tomb. But that's based on historical knowledge about what Romans did to crucified victims.
But that's not in the text of the New Testament, correct?
The text of the New Testament is written by people who are Christian believers.
Sure.
They are going to write only Christian beliefs. And so if you want to know what the Christians said, you can read the New Testament. If you want to know what happened historically, you would treat the New Testament the way you treat the Book of Mormon. And if you don't want to treat it the way you treat the Book of Mormon or the Quran or any other religious text that you don't believe in, if you don't want to treat the New Testament that way, that's fine, but that's a religious decision. It's not history. So history treats all sources the same way, not differently.
Here is the conclusion of the whole matter. The fine-tuning of the universe is precisely what we should expect, given what the Bible reveals. It isn't safe, but it's good. Very good. The heavens are telling of the glory of God, and the expanse declares his handiwork. Day unto day pours forth speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge. For we did not follow cleverly devised tales when we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. For when he received honor and glory from God the Father, such an utterance as this was made to him by the majestic glory. This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased.